Since my parents fled Laos back in 1975, my mom has not seen her sister, Thai Mai. Now, after 30 years of separation, they'll finally see each other as we wait at the airport for Thai Mai's arrival from Laos. As Thai Mai emerges at the end of the hallway, my mom gets emotionally charged and weeps quietly. When Thai Mai comes out from the hallway, she and my mom hug each other, pat each other, cry a lot of tears, and tunefully exchange words of sadness and happiness. As I'm observing their sister reunion, I turn to my 3-year-old daughter, who probably doesn't understand the drama being played in front of her, and sees her look up and down into an empty space behind Thai Mai's right shoulder, as if someone's standing there. From the airport, we come home. I start to clean up my bedroom while my wife cooks in the kitchen. Except for my daughter, who's playing with her toys in her walk-in closet, everybody else is either in the kitchen with my wife or in the family room with my mom. Occasionally, my wife does, however, come into her bedroom. Then, I hear my daughter talking to someone. As I walk out of our bedroom to put some stuff away into the garage, I glance into our walk-in closet. Its door is left ajar. I can see the back of a woman, whom I assume is my wife, crouching close to my daughter. To get to the garage, I have to go through the kitchen. When I step into the kitchen, I see my wife cooking there. That surprises me. I turn around to check for the other woman. My sister-in-law is cleaning up the dining table where her husband is mixing up some la. My mom and Thai Mai are sitting next to each other and chatting in the family room with my sister and my dad. With some anxiety, I quickly return to the bedroom to check on my daughter. Before I get to our walk-in closet, I can hear her talking. Carefully, I push the closet door wide open, scan around the whole closet, and see nobody there but my daughter. I ask her whom she's talking to, and she tells me that it's Grandma's sister. I pick her up, take her to the family room to see Thai Mai, and quietly ask her if she was talking to that Grandma's sister. She tells me that it's not that sister, but another sister. In a hurry to go play, my daughter squirms down from my arms and runs back into her bedroom. After dinner, as we're getting ready to sleep, I tell my wife about the little incident. My wife asks our daughter a few more questions. Piece by piece, our daughter is able to tell us that that woman she was talking to in a closet isn't Thai Mai, isn't as old as Thai Mai, but it's another sister of my mom, and that that sister came with Thai Mai at the airport. Because my wife asks, I tell her what I have always known. My mom had another sister, Dainza, who died some 20 years ago. My wife freaks out and makes me guard her while she performs her evening night routine in our bathroom. Late into the night, while everyone is asleep, I wake up to the sound of someone whispering. It's my daughter. She's been whispering. She's sitting on top of my wife's chest, who's lying flat next to me. It seems like a dream. Doing a reality check, I close my tired eyes tightly for a second, open them wider, and look at my daughter longer. She doesn't whisper anymore, but is still sitting on top of my wife. She turns to me and deliberately smiles at me. That's strange because my daughter never consciously smiles at me or at anybody for that matter. I don't know why my wife doesn't even budge, but I'm not going to let my daughter sit on her chest anymore. I pull my daughter down to sleep between me and my wife. I look at my wife a few seconds and can't see nor hear her breathing. Just before I shake her abdomen, she suddenly gasps for air and starts to breathe normally. I heave a sigh of relief, lie down, and hold my daughter in my arms to go to sleep. As the days go by, my wife and I experience more strange occurrences, like birds flying into our house, loud thumping noises in the kitchen when everybody's gone to bed, cracking and creaking noises between the walls at random, strange hooting sounds outside of our bedroom windows, our front door flinging open by itself at night, and our bathroom water turning blood red. Several more times, we catch our daughter talking to someone invisible, and when we ask her about it, she keeps telling us that it's Grandma's sister, who came with Thai Mai. After 3 weeks of staying with us, Thai Mai goes out of town to visit my mom's cousin. My wife urges me to tell my parents everything. Knowing that my parents are reasonable people who don't believe in ghosts, I'm reluctant to tell. But to please my wife, so to speak, I take the risk of being ridiculed and tell my parents of the unusual occurrences since Daimai's arrival. As expected, my reasonable parents question our superstition and suspicion clinically. They frustrate me. However, at the end, they decide, for the sake of our spiritual well-being, to call a shaman to intervene. The shaman comes, does his ritual, and finds out that the spirit of Dainza is visiting us from Laos and is asking for money and food. So we prepare a lot of joss paper and a big meal for her spirit. After the shaman delivers the paper money and the meal to the spirit, they ask it to go back to where it came from and forbids it from coming back into our house. Nothing strange ever occurs again, and our daughter doesn't talk to someone invisible anymore too. But if she does again, as some kids do, I hope it'll be an imaginary friend and not to the spirit of someone dead. I will tell it like how I heard it. Names won't be mentioned. I don't want to offend the family of the victim. It is a true story of demonic forces at work. My wife's uncle is the victim of this tragedy that has left all of us sad, angry, confused, and scared all at the same time. He purchased a house for a deal in a decent neighborhood. It was a cozy house that any family would call home. The cemetery behind the house barely bothered him at all. He wasn't the superstitious type anyways. He did have a rodent problem getting into his garbage cans, knocking them over, spilling everything inside out. He was fed up and decided to take action into his own hands. One night, when the garbage cans were full, he knew the rodents would come. He took a position from inside his garage and waited. Armed with a high-powered air rifle, he finally saw what they were. They were none other than raccoons. He took aim and squeezed the trigger. The first shot hit its mark. The raccoon dropped. Some ran away, some were confused. He killed another two. The rest scattered into the night. Satisfied that his rodent problem was taken care of, he bagged the raccoons into the garbage bags and tossed the still warm bodies to the garbage cans. With a smirk on his face, he walked back into his house. And that's when he heard a irate female voice yelling his name from somewhere behind his backyard. Shining his flashlight into the backyard, he saw an old woman standing inside the cemetery. She scolded at him, yelling that he had offended her by killing her only children because they were hungry. That on this day of the month of the year and this time of the day, she would come for him. Thinking that she was just a drunk homeless person lost in the cemetery, he shrugged off her warning and walked inside of his house. Months went by. One day after work, he came home and routinely undressed to shower. As he stepped into the tub, he blacked out. Paramedics were called and he was taken by ambulance to the ER. All of his vitals were okay. Stumped, the doctors ordered for an MRI. That's when they found it. The doctors told his family somehow all of his organs were pulled down and something had physically pushed everything into the lower cavity of his body. There was absolutely nothing they could do to save him. He will die. Scared and frustrated, when my father-in-law went to visit him on his last few days, he finally told of the event that one night. Unfortunately, it was too late for anyone to do anything for him. A couple days after my father-in-law's visit, he fell into a coma and died. His funeral was held at a funeral home that was not common to Hmong people. That funeral home only had 2 or 3 Hmong customers before. Still, they catered his funeral and his family's needs flawlessly. His funeral went on without a hitch for the first and second night. But then, on the third night, funeral service went into the night hours. 11 p.m., and the last of the few people cleaning and taking equipment home were finishing up. The crowd was thinning by the minute, and finally the last of them left the funeral home. The only person left was the owner. Doing a last sweep of the place, he checked all the doors and windows again. He had a few paperwork inside of his office that could have waited until the next day, but he opted to take care of it before leaving. The hustle and bustle of the funeral home just a few minutes ago was now in eerie silence, except the sound of his ball pen pushing against paper. Then, there was a knock on his office door. The sudden noise hit him like a freight train. His mind raced over being scared, or maybe there was someone still left inside. But he checked and double-checked. There was absolutely no one else inside. He's sure of it. His heart's pounding and his pulse doubled. Goosebumps formed and he swallowed a dry gulp. Knock, knock. There it was again. Now he's sure it wasn't his imagination. There was someone on the other side of that door. He cautiously asked, "Who is it?" Nothing. He asked again, "Did you get left behind?" He gathered his courage and walked to the door. Upon opening the door slightly, he saw my wife's dead uncle standing there, holding his coffin in one hand. My wife's uncle spoke and said he was tired and just wanted to go home. The owner shut the door and called 911. The cops arrived and did another sweep. Everything was the way it should be. My wife's uncle was still in his coffin in the display room. All doors were locked. But they did find what looked like a heavy object was dragged on the carpet from his coffin all the way to where the office door was. Ever since that incident, that funeral home will not cater to Hmong funerals anymore. My wife's uncle died an unexpected violent death that had no explanation or answer for foreclosure. Whether it be his ignorance to the supernatural or just bad luck, we will never know. I have a story that happened when I went hunting. My cousin, Ricky, was in the army and he had gotten back from deployment. The first thing he decided to do was go hunting with me. Ricky had never hunted feral hogs before, but this would be my 6th time hunting feral hogs. Now, we live in Arkansas, so it was legal for us to go hunting feral hogs with AR-15s. Ricky and I drove out to our hunting spot and got into separate tree stands. We each carried our own rifles with several 30-round magazines. It was a pretty cloudy day, and we weren't sure we were going to get to see any hogs at all. Luckily for us, we only waited for about 20 minutes before we saw a pack of about 15 hog. There was a large sow, probably 300 pounds, and a few decent-sized ones down at a large puddle. Ricky wasn't the brightest guy, but what he lacked in brains, he made up for it in brawn. So Ricky, being Ricky, started shooting rapidly at the big one and the few ones around her. I shot at the ones running off as we both got down to chase the ones that got away. Ricky started yelling and hollering because he had managed to down the mama in one shot behind the ear. We had 3 dead hogs, but we could carry more in the bed of the truck. At this point, it was about noon and it started sprinkling. I followed the trail for a couple of 100 yards while Ricky decided to chase down the ones he had heard squealing, hollering, and shooting at them while on the move. I kept following the trail until it stopped at a stream. Now, this is where it gets interesting. As I stepped onto a strip of sand, the rain started pouring. The wind picked up and I couldn't hear Ricky shooting anymore. I didn't remember there being a tornado warning for our area, but it seemed like one was coming. I was extremely scared because I wasn't too good at navigating and the leaves for the trail were all kicked up. I called Ricky on my phone and he told me that he was heading for the truck so he could get some tarp. I was relieved until I remembered something very important. I carried my phone with me, but Ricky always leaves his phone in the car whenever he goes anywhere. And we only carried one tarp on the trip, which we brought with us. I ran back to the general direction of the tree stands while praying and holding the cross I wear around my neck. As I get closer to the tree stands, I heard rapid-fire shots and yelling. I was terrified because of the stories I heard of Hmong people getting shot at and killed while hunting. I decided to change from my half-full mag to a full one and prepared for the worst. When I finally had the tree stand inside, I saw Ricky shooting and yelling for me. I didn't know what it was, but something serious must have happened because he usually doesn't scare that easily. I yelled out to Ricky that I was coming. He finally stopped and came out of his tree stand shaking and cradling a smoking gun in his arms. His face was pale and his head was steaming in the cold air. He said, "Let's go home, dude." "Go home? Ricky, we downed like 10 hogs and you want to go home? I'm still chasing a big one out there." Forget it. Let's just get back to the truck with the 3 we got here." Ricky starts gutting the hog he killed and I started on the other ones. I carried the smaller ones and Ricky carried the big mama all by himself. As we were walking back, Ricky kept turning back to see if we were being followed. I tried to ask him what happened, but he just kept going forward and looking back every once in a while. We got into the truck and he still looked out to where we were hunting and stared intently at it. "I'm never hunting here again. Ever." A few days go by and Ricky starts having dreams of the hunting spot. He dreamt that he was there with me, but he didn't see me. He knew I was there, but couldn't see me. He just heard the faint sound of my voice and shooting, yet he could hear everything else around him. He saw my tree stand with something in that tree. Something that he says looks human, except that its eyes were cat-like and had a pale film over them. It just sat there, sniffing, listening, and running after him after we shot the hogs. All he could do was shoot and curse at it while it goes from tree to tree. They got a shaman to find out what was happening. The shaman said that whatever that thing was, the tree I sat in was its home, and I had offended it and defiled its home. It could sense us both, but it only saw Ricky when we split up. It wanted to take Ricky, so it made me be able to call Ricky's phone and made me believe I was talking to him. The shaman says that the silver cross I had on me shielded us both from it, and that's why it stopped attacking Ricky when I came back. It could faintly hear us when we left and would keep following us. It eventually found Ricky and haunted him in his dreams, wanting to take him with it. Ricky eventually got his name changed and has been okay since. Since that incident, Ricky always carries his phone and never goes alone anywhere. Back in Laos, when my aunt was just a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, she and some kids liked to go play in the woods. Once, they found a toad under a dead log. They prodded it lightly with sticks to make it hop. It did hop every time they prodded. Then, a little girl my aunt's age started hitting it a few times with a stick. It got hurt and couldn't hop anymore. She didn't kill it after that, but just tortured it by poking holes in it with the stick. The toad was crying and bleeding. When the little girl swept it with her stick, it rolled a few times on the ground, got up on its 4 legs, and flew away. The kids couldn't believe what they saw and got scared. They ran out of the woods and returned home. That night, when the little girl who tortured the toad went to bed, she began to get sick and started moaning and groaning. After that, she got sicker and paler by the day. She didn't go outside anymore and would just stay home with her grandma and talk to herself in a low, manly voice. Occasionally, when Grandma interrupted her by telling her to stop because it's embarrassing to talk like that, she would stop for a moment. Something was obviously wrong with her. One day, her father quietly went to call a shaman to perform rituals for her. Although nobody told her about the shaman coming, she somehow knew before the shaman's arrival and began to curse out in a manly voice to the people watching her at home. She was told she was upset that they called the shaman to come disturb her. That first shaman did his rituals, but it didn't help. As the little girl got sicker and crazier, she began to transform. Her skin from head to toe got uglier looking, more like that of a toad. Her face, hands, and feet got older. Her fingernails got thicker, longer, and darker. In the middle of the night, when her family fell asleep, she liked to sit up on her bed like how a toad would sit up, talk to herself, and growled in a deep, manly voice. For that, her siblings didn't dare to sleep in the same room with her. She didn't eat with the family anymore. She would just eat in a corner using her dirty hands instead of a spoon. Sometimes, when she acted out violently, her father couldn't even hold her down because she was too strong for him. It would take a few of her family members to control her. Something strange, she would say, is that there was this old grandpa that was hungry and wanted to eat meat. Whenever she said this, the villagers would find one of their cows killed by a tiger in the morning of the next day. All of her family members and their neighbors got really scared of her. Some neighbors even planned to move away. More shamans were called to perform more rituals for her, but none of them could help her. They said that she got possessed by a wild, evil spirits of the woods because a little animal that she had wronged pleaded for help from the wild, evil spirit. She kept getting sicker and crazier for 3 or 4 more months until she died. I just wanted to share this story because it's weird and creepy. Over the summer, my family was planning to buy a new house because my brother got married. The place was getting crowded, so we wanted to move out of our duplex. My mom found a house online in Carlton, Minnesota, close to Hillside Cemetery. Since my parents don't work, they found a time to meet up with these people to check out the house. My mom and dad said that the outside of the house was kind of rusty and old, but the backyard was super wide. They just didn't like how the trees were everywhere because if there was a storm, the trees could fall onto the house. My mom said that when she got into the house, it was very cold. My mom thought it was strange because it's summer and outside is extremely hot. My mom took a look around the kitchen and there was a lot of stains. She looked at the cabinets and said that there was a lot of old rusty jars and roaches. Basically, my mom hates pests, and because of that, she didn't even like the house anymore. What my dad told us was that the guy, a house tour person, and my dad went to look at the upstairs. My dad said that the stairs were really steep and short, so it kept feeling like you would fall from the steps. My dad looked at the rooms. The bedrooms were really small. Otherwise, my dad really didn't care. My dad said there wasn't a toilet in the bathroom, only a huge tub. My mom was alone because the tour guide was with my dad, and so she saw this door in the kitchen and it led to some stairs going to the basement. As soon as my mom got downstairs, she saw all of these witchcraft stuff, and she couldn't really describe it, but she knew that the house wasn't good. One thing my mom told me was that there was a lot of big chains. My mom didn't go all the way down to the basement. She stood at the middle of the stairs staring down. My mom went to my dad and said that they should leave. It was getting late. When they were leaving, the tour guide asked my parents if they were interested. My mom straight out said no. He said it's alright. Not a lot of people are ever interested. As they were leaving, the tour guide told my parents that there was once a suicide downstairs and someone hung in the backyard. My mom was totally ready to leave by now, and when they came home, my mom told my dad, and my dad said that he was getting a sense like they shouldn't be there. I heard this story about a year ago from my cousin. So as you know, most funerals last about 3 to 4 days. This guy, let's call him Moa. Moa was recording the whole funeral with his camera. Anyways, after a long day at the funeral, everyone else was starting to leave and so did Moa. When Moa got home, he undressed, showered, and was ready to get in bed, but he noticed that he had forgotten his camera at the funeral home, so he called the funeral home. The first time he called, no one answered. The second time he called, no one answered. And the third time he called, someone picked up the phone. Moa said, hi. I think I left my camera at the funeral home. Can I come get it? The guy on the other end said it was fine for him to come. When he got to the funeral home, Moa found his camera still on his tripod, which was in the room where the body is at. But when he found his camera, he noticed that it was still recording. When he got home, he was rewinding it, Then, he noticed something weird. He stopped at the part where the phone was ringing. Remember when he called the place? When the phone rang 2 times, he called, but he saw no one. But when the phone rang the 3rd time, he saw the dead body from the casket get up and answer the phone. When they hung up the phone, the dead body went back into the coffin and closed it. After seeing that, Mo was freaked out and deleted the whole thing. Somebody in the comment section said that he should have uploaded it to Vine or Instagram and that he would have been famous by now. Back in Laos in the early 50s, my uncle Dumbi and his friend Tong decided they would court girls in a nearby village. As the sun began to set, the young men made their way to the village. When they entered the village, they noticed a home filled with people crying. Being curious, Dumbi told his friend that they should check it out. Upon arriving at the home, they noticed a hole in the wall much bigger than the others. Uncle Dumbi peeked inside, and what he saw took his breath away. There stood a brownish half-cat and human-like creature with long, sharp, human nails. The creature stood next to a mother whose infant child was slowly dying. Shocked by what he saw, he asked Tong to look through it to make sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. Tong nearly crapped his pants when he confirmed what Uncle Dumbi saw. Unsure, Dumbi looked through another hole in the wall, but all he saw was the family and the dying infant. He went back to the first hole, and there was the creature, no bigger than a 3-year-old toddler whose eyes were alien-like. Each time, the creature reached out its hand to the infant child. She gasped for air, and her eyes rolled back. This made her family cry even harder and louder, but when the creature put down its hand, the infant child breathed normally. As Uncle Dumbi and Tong watched the creature play its game with the family, they knew they had to do something or the baby would die. Uncle Dumbi came up with a plan. Once he was in the house, he knew he wouldn't be able to see the creature, so Tong was to stay outside and give him the signal. When Uncle Dumbi was near the creature, Tong had to whistle. Dumbi made his way into the home with a stick and asked a family member what was going on. The grandma told him that her grandchild was sick and she might not make it through the night. Dumbi squeezed his way behind the mother's back and slowly moved in front of her and the child. Finally, Tong let out a loud whistle from the wall. Dumbi acted on it. He started swinging and hitting air, yelling, "Everyone, help me hit the ghost." Everyone grabbed whatever they could grab and started hitting and swinging in the air. All of a sudden, everyone heard a big roar outside of the home. They all ran outside but saw nothing. That night, Dumbi and Tong explained to the family what they saw. The family was so grateful for what they had done. They asked for the young men to stay the night with them, but they refused and said it was late that they should make their way home. The 2 men began to make their way home when they heard a faint cry from a distance. Not knowing what it was, and they didn't want to take the chance, the men ran back to the village and told the family it may not be safe for them to travel. That night, the family hid Uncle Dumbi and Tong and the infant in a different home. The next morning, a family member came to tell my grandfather the news and asked that he come see the family. The grandfather of the infant was so happy they made Uncle Dumbi her godfather. My grandfather said the reason why Uncle Dumbi and Tong were able to see the creature from that particular hole was because it was where it entered from, and it could not hide itself. That's why they saw it. I once heard this family in Kansas had moved into this nice house, but something was very strange. During the night, the family put everything away and turned the TV off. In the morning, the plates were set on the table and the TV was turned on. This had happened for a few weeks, so the father asked the landlord the history behind the house. The landlord said that her father, whose name was George, lived there until he passed away 3 or 4 years back. Since then, the house was for rent, but nobody really wanted to stay long. She went to say that she thought her father's spirit may still be in the house. When her father died, he was in the cellar. He was always working on some house project. There used to be a bed in the cellar since he usually gets too tired, so he sleeps down there. Well, one day he fell asleep down in the cellar and never woke up again. The daughter came to check on him, but he didn't come to the door. Then she had a spare key. She went in to check on her dad and found him dead on his bed in the cellar. They removed the body and the bed and cleaned out all of his tools and workshop in the cellar. She put the house for sale, but no one wanted to buy it. Then they decided to rent it out, but all the tenants left as quickly as they came. Knowing the history, the Hmong family bought a bed and placed it down in the cellar. They even left an open seat at the table for the spirit, which they call George. During the night, they would just shout out to George to remember to put the dishes away and turn off the TV before he went to sleep. George was a good spirit and never did anything to frighten visitors or family. When it's time to eat, the Hmong family would call out to George to come and eat. When there were visitors, the family would tell the visitors to not sit in George's seat. The best part about George was that, for some reason, the house never had any problems. No leaky faucets or pipes, no squeaky stairs, no loose doors, and no lawn never needed to be mowed. I think the family lived there for 10 years. Then George's daughter sold the house to the Hmong family.